Hello, I'm Jordan. Steve Donahue and I are doing a month-long read-along of The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. So today I'm going to be talking about the first quarter of that book, which conveniently is the first 25 chapters. I think Steve said he'll be putting up his video at some point later this weekend, so of course look for that as well. I'll leave a link to his channel if for some reason you're aware of mine and not aware of his. I don't know how that would be possible. But anyways, so yeah, The Way We Live Now. I'm going to try to avoid giving a point-by-point summary of these chapters, partly because it's an extremely complex plot in a lot of ways. There are dozens of characters. There are multiple subplots. But I think I can give kind of a general overview of what's going on and what has happened up to this point. And then I'm thinking I'll kind of talk about my thoughts on it so far. And I'll try to keep those two things separate, but we'll see how that goes. So essentially the story is about, if it can be said to have a main character, I would say the main character is a young man named Felix Carberry, who is a baronet, and he's a wastrel. He has squandered what little inheritance he had, and he is a deeply, almost comically selfish and self-involved, narcissistic, kind of cowardly character. And his mother, Lady Carberry, is a widow and a hack writer, who is set on living kind of independently, but is also more than anything set on a a good life for her children, particularly her son, Sir Felix, and she has another child named Henrietta. So the scheme that Lady Carberry, I think, kind of comes up with, and that Sir Felix kind of reluctantly agrees to, is to try to woo a young woman named Marie Melmotte, who is the daughter of Augustus Melmotte, who is kind of the focal point of the book thus far. He is a massively wealthy man who also has a reputation for being kind of a scam artist. And more importantly than that, it's very interesting as an American reader because he's an upstart, right? So he's not a member of any kind of English gentry or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how all of that works, but it's striking to see that he is, all of the dukes and barons and duchesses and what have you are flocking to him, but they're also all looking down on him because he's an upstart. His prestige comes entirely from his money, which, although it's also interesting that everyone seems to be in need of money except for Melmotte, but they're also all ashamed of that. It's a very well done kind of dynamic. So anyways, Felix, throughout these first 24 chapters, decides to try to seduce Marie Melmotte, succeeds at it, and then these 25 chapters kind of close out with him finally working up the courage to ask for Augustus Melmotte's permission, at which point Augustus says, basically, no, unless you can prove to me that you are a sound financial decision to have as a son-in-law, I'm not going to give any approval, which inspires Francis to actually work towards creating his own fortune. It's the first time we've really seen him ambitious for anything. He's not particularly bright, but he comes up with a kind of scheme to take advantage of a business project that he is a director of. There are a series of directors to this project who do absolutely nothing. And it's a railway company, it's a railway that's being built in America, or allegedly being built in America, from Salt Lake City to Veracruz, Mexico. And Melmotte is the kind of the chairman of the English chapter of this project. And he's assigned all these various directors who don't do a damn thing. And so Felix has decided to try and, using complex things involving shares, to try and make a fortune off of this business project, in order to, I assume, to gain Melmotte's approval, in order to get Marie Melmotte and her fortune. In the meantime, back to Lady Carberry. She has a daughter named Henrietta, as I mentioned, and Henrietta there are two men in love with Henrietta. One is her cousin, who is Roger Carberry, who is kind of, I'm not sure what the technical term is. He's kind of the head of the family. He's a cousin. He owns a small estate, and he is one of the kind of moral voices of the story. There are very few who are kind of morally upright, and he is one of them. And he's in love with her. And then also his friend, Paul Montague, who is another one of those directors of that railway project, is also in love with her. And that love triangle is done, I think, quite well, because we see in Roger Carberry a character who we want to kind of latch onto as the the moral voice of the story, and yet he is extremely petty, I think, when it comes to his relationship with Paul, his friend, because they are both in love with the same woman. He takes it very, very personally. He sees it as ungrateful for Paul to be doing this, and it kind of brings out the worst in him. Similarly, Paul is also a fairly admirable character, but we see him brought low, and he's consciously brought low by his involvement with this kind of scam railway interest. So that's kind of where the plot is in a nutshell so far, but of course there's a lot going on. Of course the characters, I'm leaving out a lot, and I'm leaving out mostly their personality. I will say that I do think Sir Felix is the most interesting person in the book so far, which is a really interesting feat on the part of Trollope, because he seems to be constantly trying to make the reader more and more disgusted with this character. Like, there's this scene right after he successfully woos Marie, where we see him meeting a country girl in the country who he has seduced and is essentially living as his mistress, or his potential mistress. He is a gambler. He is, like I said, unbelievably selfish. But for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's just me, there is a charm to him. Like, I enjoy reading about him. And I think a large part of that is due to the fact that Trollope writes very good dialogue. This book has a lot of dialogue. It's more dialogue than any Victorian novel that I know of. And it's all really, really well. Even just between, he seems to be very good at pairing up characters that you really want to see kind of go at it. I think the best example of that is that there is a kind of tangential side moment. I'm sure these characters will appear more later on, involving a priest and a bishop, and their various approaches to religion and their very distinct personalities make it extremely entertaining to read them in conversation, because the bishop they're both very, very good people. Trollope makes a point of kind of demonstrating that, but the bishop is not at all intellectual, really. He's not at all even really religious. He's just purely functional. You could almost call him like a humanist who happens to be a bishop, whereas the priest is a convert to Catholicism and is kind of, it's not a zealot, but he is very, very passionate. He sees it as his duty to convert people, not in any kind of self-aggrandizing way at all, but just because he sees it as his spiritual duty. So there are these two different approaches to decency and to religion, and when they converse, it's quite fun to read. One thing I will say is that I was expecting this book to be more of a satire. I don't think it really is a satire, partly because it's not very funny, and I think even when Trollope is intending it to be funny, it's not that funny. It's one of those kind of just sprawling kind of sign of the times novels, and as such, I'm not sure that it has a whole lot of depth to a reader who is so removed from those times. At least for me, that's been an issue I've had with it so far. I will also say that I feel like the characters kind of are maybe a little bland. I think this book suffers from a certain amount of blandness overall. I will say that. I don't see myself remembering any of these characters for long after I've read the book, besides perhaps Sir Felix. I think, at least in the very beginning of the book, we get the sense that Lady Carberry is going to be this very delightful, fun amusing character to read about, but she's a little flat. Like, I mean, she's not flat in the way that some of Dickens' characters can be, but I mean, she doesn't surprise the reader ever. There's very few surprises in this book so far, I would say. But back to Dickens, I will say that also that I feel like I have, I found myself wishing that I was reading Dickens as I was reading this, and that's crazy because I'm not even a huge fan of Dickens, but this book has really set into relief the way that Dickens could do certain things that Trollope either couldn't do or had no interest in doing. For one, this book has no atmosphere, in my opinion. It's just a series of events and characters. There's very little narrative voice, which surprised me because I've always heard that Trollope has such a delightful voice as a writer. He will pop up from time to time, and I think the tone of the book is kind of clever and ironic and funny. But I mean, there's just no sense that you are. There's very little sense that you were kind of being told the story by an engaging storyteller. It feels very, very. What's the word? It feels very, very functional, I guess. You know, it's well done. It's a very well. It's a solidly written book, but it doesn't take any risks really, and it doesn't surprise you, and it doesn't really envelop you in its atmosphere the way that I think Dickens had. Dickens has those wonderful. Say what you want about him. He has those wonderful, almost hallucinogenic passages of just weird descriptive writing. There is almost no descriptive writing in this book at all, and in that sense, it also reminded me a bit of Pride and Prejudice. But anyways, I don't want to give the impression that I haven't liked what I've read so far. Like I said, I am very invested in the story, particularly in Sir Felix. And I will also say that the love triangle between Roger Carbury, Henrietta, and Paul Montague is quite well done, particularly in the character of Roger, because you get this sense that he is legitimately in love. And it also... You really want to like him even within the love story, because there's this wonderful passage where Trollope says that he is not a person who will fall easily back into the kind of jilted lover thing and live with that and cherish that. It will be a legitimate sorrow if he is not able to win Henrietta. And it's that wonderful thing where he's not an old man, but he is on the verge of being an old man. So this he sees as his last chance to have that kind of life. And the scenes where he converses with her about this and he professes his love are really quite nice and tender, because she has an enormous amount of respect for him, as she should, but she just simply doesn't feel that way about him. And there's a wonderful tragic note to that, in that Roger, for all of his good qualities, cannot accept that for what it is. He turns it into a kind of jealousy battle with him and Montague. Was it Paul Montague? Sorry, I have a real hard time keeping up with the names here. So anyways, yeah, I hope that made some kind of sense. I am enjoying the book. I hope that it will kind of become a little more lively, perhaps, or a little more, I don't know, a little deeper. As it is, I'm just kind of coasting along on the surface and enjoying it for what it is. I certainly wouldn't say that I don't like the book, but I'm hoping for a little more down the road. So please let me know what you're thinking about it if you happen to be reading it as well, and make sure you check out Steve's video when he makes it. I'm sure he's going to have a lot more interesting things to say about it than I am, and I'm sure he's going to be quite upset about some of my complaints. My complaints are minor, let me say that much. It's a perfectly functional book, but yeah, like I said, I'm hoping for a little more. So thank you for watching, and have a good day.